important point from this is from the World Economic Forum. The important point is the digital identity is going to encompass literally every aspect of your life, every aspect of society. It's going to be part of smart cities, healthcare, financial services. They call it food and sustainability, travel, mobility, humanitarian, e-commerce, social platforms, e-government. See, everything is being digitalized. People are going to be digitalized. That's the reality of what we're facing. It's quite horrific what's going on. I never thought in my lifetime I'd be seeing this, but it is what it is. But these globalists, NWO deep staters, they have an agenda and they're trying to push it on all of humanity. Right now, through the unipolar world, it's called the unipolar rules-based world order. So it's getting pretty much exposed. It's top-down dictatorship as far as we're concerned. And these establishment political entities are just, they just write the legislation and they deceive the people, basically. So the third point this is here, what's going on. And I read this in the New York Times, basically deep state media. They're arguing that the skin shields EMF radiation, and therefore there's no effect from EMF radiation. Again, this goes against all the science that says there's biological effects. And you can see how they're deceiving people. And sure, there may be some shielding with the skin, but we know it gets absorbed in. Because if it's causing cancer, if it's causing organ disorder, it's going. Another argument, they say, and this is from the telecommunication industry, everyone. They say the sun emits 1 million times more radiation than these towers or other devices. And therefore, there's no harm from it. Again, this is what's called false equivalency. On one hand, they're talking about solar radiation, and they're comparing it to cellular radiation. There's apples and oranges. They're two different things. So that argument doesn't hold up. And we already know the sun's rays, the ultraviolet rays, can be extremely harmful, causing cancer. But that's a false equivalency argument, because there's different forms of radiation, and they all have their different characteristics and impacts. And then they argue health effects do not correlate with increased radiation. And they said there's no tangible evidence of that. Come on. We looked at cancer statistics. Yes, Rose, false equivalency. We look at cancer statistics since the 80s. Based on our research, they've more than doubled. And this is proportionally, even though the population has grown since then, and it doesn't matter. They've almost doubled. And the danger here is they're going to cover up statistics. And we don't know the cause of death. It's kind of like we're in the lockdown again. People are dying and they're saying the cause is this when it was something else. People are dying and they say they died of that, but they never say they died of EMF radiation, do they? So we don't, it's a big unknown, right? And here's the big one. And I wanted to talk to Paul about this, and we're going to have him on. There's a lot of people who are what's called electromagnetic frequency sensitive, right? EMF sensitivity. I'm partly sensitive. I've been around the towers. I get headaches. I have oxidative stress. around the towers? Other symptoms. Paul here today, he's been fighting it all his life. He's been running from it. It's literally defined where he lives. He's had to go to a remote rural area just to protect his health and well-being. He's one example of that. There's other people on that we hear about. So the World Health Organization, and get this, everyone, this is unbelievable, and it shows exactly what we're up against. The World Health Organization, remember, they get their orders, they get their information from the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. And then they put it up there. The World Health Organization does not recognize EMF sensitivity. What they recognize is what they call EMF hypersensitivity. Hypersensitivity. And I was thinking today, it made me realize why they do that. Because what they're doing, it's like they're saying people who are EMF hypersensitive, they're kind of like a hyperactive kid. So the problem is with the people, not with the radiation. You see what they're doing? They're trying to say it's a psychological issue. It's really insulting to all the people. No one can dispute this. It's happening right now. Yes, Truckee, it's been well planned for years in advance. It's a tyranny. And it's crazy what these people are doing. Why are they doing it? It must be driven by control and profit. They can control all of humanity. Once they get in people's minds and being able to manipulate people, control them, they control everyone. So all I say is, the key thing we got to do is raise awareness, and hopefully a large part of humanity will rise up and question this. And I have to qualify, NCA is not against technology. We would like to see 5G isolated out of the public domain. All those technocrats, all those establishment politicians can go there and they can live with the 5G, and we'll see how they're doing. You see what I'm saying? It shouldn't be in the public domain. And people are right. I remember at the beginning, they were saying, again, this is like the lockdown. It's like an experiment. They're pushing this on people.
At the top of a 3-story apartment, I was now living in a single-family dwelling in a small town. Now, fast forward to 2012, I moved into a 10-story apartment building on a busy street with adjacent cell towers. And my symptoms were very, very bad. I basically developed something called chronic pelvic pain. I had nausea, poor sleep, fatigue, pressure behind the eyes, brain fog, loss of muscle strength, some loss of motor control, my legs buckling underneath me, the recurring corneal erosion I described, which doesn't sound like much, but when you wake up in the middle of the night with your low tear production, what happens is your cornea starts to stick to your eyelids in REM sleep, which is extremely painful because it's basically tearing the cornea. I had gastrointestinal problems, easily strained muscles with the slightest movement, and I could not lift more than 10 pounds without being in severe pain or chronic pain that would go on for several days. Because doctors know nothing about this, they have no concept of biophysics, which Dr. Jack Cruz, I would encourage you to check out his work, talks about. He's a very well-known neurosurgeon in the United States, and I'd encourage you to check out his work. So I go through all the pharmaceuticals, medical marijuana, nothing really worked. And then it was only through going out into nature, which is something I'm very passionate about, like going out into remote locations, I noticed my symptoms began to reduce. And at first I wasn't sure it meant anything, but on a second trip to a very different location, again, I noticed relief, and then I began to do the research to figure out what environmental toxicity was causing this, because when I went back to the apartment building, my symptoms simply ramped up again. How I figured out it was EMFs was by doing something called grounding, which I'm sure many in the audience know about, whereby you stand on the earth barefoot so that you can have a conductive relationship with the earth and therefore ground and dissipate current. And some of my symptoms, particularly of nausea and pain, began to instantly dissipate. And I found some relief, but I was still suffering. And what I needed to do at that point was, after trying different gadgets and gizmos, EarthCom and different product lines, I realized I was still quite unwell and probably headed for sensitivity. You have to move to a low EMF environment. Unless you can buy a single family dwelling or some unique situation, it's very challenging to do that. So what made sense was to simply shield the apartment. So I used graphite paint, radio foil, metallic window laminate, copper curtains, and a copper bed canopy. And within that, with this is basically turning the apartment into a semi-Faraday cage. And with that, most symptoms were reduced or eliminated. I still had a pain issue that was resolved, that took another year and a half to resolve, that had been stimulated by the overexposure to electromagnetic fields. And this was an underlying chronic issue I'd had for years. One of the things that I've learned about EMF exposure is that the overexposure exploits any kind of weakness that you have in your body. So any other sort of underlying chronic condition will flare up and be exacerbated by that exposure. Now, for me, we moved from that apartment several years after shielding it. We used the same meter to search out and find a safe single family dwelling in a smaller town, and it was shielded. We had lots of trees around it, close to the ground. Of course, when you're living anywhere above the first floor in any urban environment or subdivision, the higher up you go, the more your exposure, usually because of cell phone antenna masts. So about 2017, we found a beautiful small home backing onto a nice green space, and we had a very low EMF exposure. It didn't need to do too much shielding there. But then in 2020, they deployed, there was a massive acceleration in cell phone deployment, which I think Stephen has talked about, because that was part of the agenda that was rolling out after the COVID PSYOP began. And then we dodged a few bullets. Some towers were going up in the middle of the night without anybody knowing them. In our case, they put 3 antennas on top of an apartment building. So of course, it's a low-income apartment building for people on low income and disabilities, adjacent to, next door to, a junior school. It's like a grade school. So there's 3 antennas placed on that, and basically we experienced a 200-fold increase in power density exposure to our home 2 blocks away. And so this then really forced our situation, me being symptomatic with brain fog, pressure behind the eyes, poor quality sleep, and fatigue. I'd be lucky if I felt good 1 day per week. So we finally just went the ultimate route, as Stephen said at the beginning, which is to simply go full rural environment, and that's what we've done, and that's why my symptoms resolved moving into our house, which is surrounded by trees and has aluminum siding on it. And as soon as we moved in, we put a steel roof on. One of the reasons to put a steel roof on is, of course, because of the satellite exposure is continuing to accelerate. So we wanted to have that coverage. And trees also
what we say, Paul, is be aware of your environment, where you live, what's around you. Are there any towers? Are there any small cell antennas? And what's the Wi-Fi signals coming in? What's going on in your house? Are there smart meters? Are there any other smart devices that are contributing to the EMF level? And someone commented because you can't turn off the smart meter or the smart meter on your gas or your hydro, Paul. So obviously, in that scenario, you would have to shield it with some kind of metal mesh, ideally. And I think with the smart meters, the best thing to do, Paul, a lot of people shield them on the outside, which is fine. But I find the worst radiation is coming through the wall. So ideally, you want to shield it on the inside of the smart meter. Doing on the outside, that's going away from your house, right? But it's what's coming through the wall that is more significant. So if you can somehow shield it there, I don't know if you can somehow put up even like aluminum or stainless steel mesh over that area, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, Paul. That would provide a nice shielding effect there. The problem I'm facing, what's happening, Paul, as they increase the radiation levels in urban, rural, airplanes, trains, you name it, is that the base level radiation is increasing. So it's like the frog in the boiling water analogy, Paul, is that the radiation levels are increasing, even just overall.
Yeah.
And that's a real concern. What's terrifying to me, Paul, is what's coming. Like this deployment, like this is nothing what we have right now compared to what's coming, right? And they're only going to intensify it. And the grid, I call it the 5G grid or the EMF grid, is going to tighten. So what's going to happen, Paul, when people can't get away from it? Are they going to be completely debilitated? Because there could be a situation.
I mean, this is.
No, but like we're getting to the point where, like, even when I'm walking my dog, like there's towers, I can't avoid them. And there's base level radiation. And I don't like them. I walk by them, I get a headache, right? So that's what's happening. How are we going to get away from it, Paul?
Well, this is where the public awareness comes in, and starting to really just doing start. We're not going to be able to. Running is delaying, but ultimately, it needs to be confronted, and it needs to be called out for what it is. And to some of your points earlier, we're governed by Safety Code 6 in Canada. There's similar guidelines in the United States and essentially everywhere, almost all over the planet, which says that there's no there's no biological effects until it heats tissue. Which, as you've already mentioned at the start of your talk, there are thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing profound subthermal biological and health effects. We have the Food and Drug Administration 20 years ago commissioned a study by the National Toxicology Program to study exposures on, I know you know this, of rats or mice for 2G and 3G. They actually, when they commissioned the study, they thought this would be enough to put the whole issue to bed. Like, as in they would prove that it doesn't do anything. And of course, those studies that came out, initial results came out in 2016, and more cogent and robust. This was a gold standard testing. It had all the money to do it right, and all these mice were exposed to was the carrier wave, and the cancers, schwannomas, all these different cancers, were very easy to spot at elevated levels in the mice who were exposed compared to those mice who weren't exposed. So that's just the carrier wave. One of the things that I think is important to consider too is like the meters that you and I have, the AM acoustimeter, AM10, and some of the other similar, less or even more expensive ones. What they don't measure is modulation and pulsation. Okay. And the modulation is basically what this, what the waveform looks like. And one of the things they're doing with 5G and of course eventually with 6G and all this stuff is, in order to pack more data onto the carrier wave, they're having to modulate the signal to do that. And they're also using other types of extreme ELF. They already are doing this with Wi-Fi routers and things like that, extremely low frequencies that have other biological effects. So when I was referencing the National Toxicology Gold Standard Program, these mice weren't receiving, phone calls or texts. They were just getting the carrier wave beamed at them. They weren't getting the data. And this is something that someone like Dr. Jack Cruz, other people like Professor Martin Paul have talked about, that, and Deborah Davies too from Environmental Health Trust, that the changes in the waveform are extremely distressing to our body, even at low power densities. And I had a lot of trouble understanding this as a non-STEM, like non-sort of science person. But Deborah Davies, an accomplished and well-recognized epidemiologist, has worked for the United Nations, done a lot of stuff. She said what she started doing was doing this. So this is what a cell phone signal might be like. You get the idea that there's not a sine wave. It's not analog. It's digital. So it's constant dissonance and disruption. And although, I'm not sensitive enough, and thank goodness, to notice that, but at a cellular level, our bodies register it, and it's extremely, and has biological and health effects that are, according to Dr. Jack Cruz and some other thought leaders on this, are actually potentially more damaging than the outright power density readings, which I know, as you shared, have gone up, exponentially over the last couple of years.
Yeah, the meter does show the pulsations through the peak signal, the changes. So you can see the changes in the frequency. You're seeing the different pulsations, Paul. And they're not 100% sure, but they think the pulsations, like you said, is contributing to the ill health effects. So my message to anyone out there, and we get our fair share of critics, Paul. So I tell these people, you think there's no harm? Put that Wi-Fi modem beside your head on. We don't want you to do it, but you don't think there's no harm. Put it beside your head for 10, 30 minutes and prove us wrong. Right? But we don't want you to do that. You're going to hurt yourself, but it is what it is. I find that's the best way to shut these people up, right? You don't think there's harm? Yeah. Fine. There's a tower over there. Go bask in it for an hour. Direct line.
Yeah.
Right, Paul? So
yeah, if you go, if you're diagnosed with brain cancer and you need to meet with the surgeon, the first thing the surgeon will ask you is, what side of your head did you hold the phone? You typically hold the phone with. So there's a proliferation of acoustic neuromas. These are cancers of the inner ear, glioblastomas, cancers of neoplasm, cancers of the salivary gland. And again, it references, just to back up your point, the footprint of the phone and where you're holding it and where the antennas are. The same things have also been found with women who for convenience sake keep the phone tucked away in their bra, and many aggressive breast cancer victims have found that the footprint of the phone exactly matches where this cancer is showing up.
Yeah, that's absurd. And then they're trying to say the skin is a shield, right?
Yeah.
Paul, they're saying skin is shielding. Like, Like they're lying, like the media, the state media is lying like you wouldn't believe. It's just like during the lockdown. They're saying
Hmm.
whatever is the mainstream narrative.